Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and having learned quite a few things from, through, and from within human interactions, and having pursued and completed my master's in business administration and in clinical psychology, and having had the chance to work as a counselor and as a therapist for the past 5 to 6 years, I today wish to talk about expectations. So many a times, we would hear a few people say, or a lot of people say, or in fact, we would come across even some quotes and sayings that having expectation is the cause of all misery. Or we would even hear some people say that I've stopped having expectations from anybody, while there are others who come with enormous expectations from themselves and from others. And because I've had a chance to work as a counselor and a therapist for more than 5 years now, what I've objectively understood is that both these people working on these two extreme ends, polar opposite ends, come with very unrealistic ideas and beliefs and a mindset with regards to expectations. So let's understand how this works in different situations, in different scenarios, and how probably to a large degree, or at least to some degree, our happiness or our miseries are dependent on the foundation of expectations. So, as a counselor, because I'm associated with an academy, wherein I'm interacting with students, teachers, and parents, and their expectations from each other and from the academy as well, and vice versa. The academy's expectations from the students, from the parents, and from the teachers, and its overlap and its interplay to a large degree determines whether we feel disappointed, whether we are neutral about the situation, or whether we are hopeful about some kind of a progress, even little progress, in the future. 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, a year down the line, or even 2 years down the line. So now let's ask as to why do these parents and do these children seek admission or take admission in the academy? Well, quite naturally, to prepare themselves for the competitive exams. The competitive exams that happens within the school level, within the state level, and within the national levels. To seek guidance of the teachers and of the mentors with the background of preparing and for appearing in the competitive exams and with the expectation of clearing those competitive examinations. Now, in a way, to a certain degree, it's about seeking guidance, it's about seeking coaching to prepare oneself well so that they are ready to face the challenges that come forward, to be able to overcome them, to seek and to get the desired result, which is their expectation. Now, why does the academy give admissions to these students or provide admission to these students who come to seek admission? Well, for obvious few reasons. Firstly, the financial aspect of the business, so that the inflow and the outflow of the finances is consistently generated. For the business to grow, for the academy to grow, which is again an aspiration and expectation. Thirdly, to help others, parents and students, achieve their aspirations, achieve their goals, meet their expectations for a future that they aspire for themselves by providing them mentorship and coaching. Fourthly, it helps build a legacy. The next point being that the more awareness that people have about various competitive exams, about various career options, the better equipped they are to some degree to make informed choices. Next, because knowledge is a wealth that only grows when it's shared. Quite naturally, to some degree or at least to a large degree, it helps in taking knowledge forward. Now, let's assume for an instance that I am one such student who's taken admission within the academy. And then let's also assume that I'm not somebody, I'm not that child, I'm not that person whose foundation of maths and physics is very strong. And let's say assume that in the first test itself, within the academy or within my school, I happen to score 30% marks in mathematics and 33% marks in physics. And I've been able to do relatively well in other subjects. And I've not been that consistent with regards to attending the lectures for these two particular subjects, mathematics and physics. Firstly, because they are not my strong subjects. Secondly, I feel scared when anybody talks about these subjects. Thirdly, there's almost a kind of an animosity with regards to these two subjects. So, quite naturally, if there's a sense of animosity, I don't really like my enemies. So, I don't really like meeting them on a daily basis or quite regularly. And then, when I get such results, I go and start shouting or fighting with my teachers, with the management of the academy, in keeping with the marks that I've got, in keeping with the marks that I've scored. Well, let's just say that over here, if I'm expecting to score 80 or 90%, or even 70%, within the first 2 months of seeking admission, wherein I'm not regularly attending these two lectures, wherein I have a kind of animosity towards these particular subjects and thereby to some degree with teachers as well, wherein I'm not present, wherein I'm not engaged, wherein I'm not attentive, and wherein I'm not practicing regularly. Quite naturally, it's very unrealistic on my part, and probably unrealistic on the parts of my parents as well, to expect a result which shows a scoring of 70, 80, or 90%, wherein my presence, wherein my attention, wherein my practice has not been duly put in place. And it is this gap between the reality check in and the undue expectation or unrealistic expectation that results in disappointment, that results in misery. That results us in feeling hurt and rejected. Likewise, as I work in the capacity of a counselor and as a therapist with Crossroad Rehabilitation and the Addiction Center, wherein people come to rehabilitate themselves or are sent by their family members to rehabilitate themselves to get out of addiction, it also requires them to have a reality check. Now, of course, over here, the expectations of the clients, the patients, and their family member is to see these people, is to see their loved ones, is to see their family members out of the clutches of addiction, which is why they are sent away from their homes, which is why they're not allowed to interact with the outside world, at least for a while, which is why they are not allowed to interact through social media, which is why a sum of money is spent on their rehabilitation. Quite naturally, would only take place if they are attentively present for their sessions, if they are actively engaged in their sessions, if they are sincere about overcoming their addictions or their addictive tendencies, if they are sincere about addressing their own pain, which led them to addiction or addictive tendencies, if they get enough love and support from the family members when they come out of the rehabilitation center, only can the mission then be truly accomplished, which is of the client having rehabilitated themselves completely and thereby transforming themselves completely to not having to have a slip again. And yet, it would be quite an unrealistic expectation on my part as their counselor and therapist to assume that none of these clients or none of these patients are ever going to have a slip if I notice any kind of insincerity with regards to their attention, with regards to their engagement, with regards to their presence, with regards to their support system through the course or after the course of their recovery. Now, in keeping with the reality check of our expectations, I can cite another personal example wherein a few months back my dad passed away. And before he passed away, he was hospitalized for a month and a half in a hospital in Jabalpur where my mother also works as a gynecologist, as a consulting gynecologist. And so, why was he put there for a month? What was our expectation to put him there for a month? Wherein, quite literally, he was tied down on his bed. Wherein there were tubes inserted inside of him from almost all possible openings. Now, quite naturally, our expectation was not to hurt him, was not to torment him, but the expectations with regards to keeping him admitted for a month or more than a month was to get him to be as okay as possible, was to be able to bring him to a certain degree of recovery from the ailments that he was experiencing. Quite naturally, the unsaid expectation was that the doctors do their jobs properly, which they of course did very well. The unsaid expectation, quite naturally, was that he be monitored regularly and consistently. And yet, given the everyday monitoring, given the assessment, and some degree of progress on some days with regards to his health, was also not denied, was also not avoided, but rather was accepted that even if he does recover, he probably would not ever get back to his earlier functioning self. Now, over here, with regards to the everyday monitoring, with regards to the everyday assessment, with regards to the everyday attention and attendance paid by the nurses, the staff members, and the doctors, and the way my father's health had been over the last 2-3 years before he passed, it would have been unrealistic on our part to expect a miraculous recovery. So, in my understanding, whenever there's a huge gap between our reality and our romanticized version of our expectation, which to a large degree is having unrealistic expectations, is the biggest cause of our disappointment, of us feeling disappointed. Of us losing faith and trust in ourselves and in others. And also to add to that, having no expectations is also a sign that probably from the earliest years of our lives, we've been knowingly or unknowingly disappointed by others that we were in relationship with. In my understanding, that's a wounded response. In my understanding, through another lens, is an avoidant response. And to some degree, unknowingly so, having no expectations or the idea to have no expectations might be preventing them from developing more intimate, more meaningful, more trustworthy, more transparent, more honest, more interdependent relationships. From another perspective, they might be running away from the reality, or their version of reality or their experience of reality has been extremely hard to chew and to digest, which is why at times it's easier to swing on to one side completely and to believe that I or we don't expect anything from anybody. Well, quite naturally, that's not the reality of our world. For everything is interdependent on each other, is interconnected with each other to help each other survive and thrive. And on the other hand, people who swing on to the other side, the other extreme of having extremely high expectations, might also be the one who, to at least some degree or to a large degree, might not be wanting to have the reality check if they are constantly outsourcing their expectations onto others without taking any accountability for their own actions and reactions. It might also be a fantasy escape to avoid dealing with the pain or the reality of the reality itself. For expectations, when realistically set, wherein we have the ability to face the reality, mostly, at least in my understanding, does not cause disappointment and hurt, does not lead to lack of trust and lack of faith, both within ourselves and in others, and creates a healthy relationship, a more attuned, a more peaceful, a more present, a more engaged relationship, both with ourselves and with others. Because, in my understanding, nothing is more real than reality itself. And if those are the aspects that affect, enhance, or deplete over a period of time our happiness and our misery, our well being and our ill being, and not an escape from it, and not an avoidance of it, or an unnecessary projection of it. So maybe if we can have a more realistic understanding of our expectations, which is more grounded, which is more in check, which we can be in tune with and thereby be attuned to, and thereby be present to be engaged with, to make it more achievable, to make our goals, to make our progress, to make our well being, to make our happiness, to make our health more realistic, more achievable. If we are at all in touch with reality or not, or have we been trying to avoid it, to run away from it, to escape it, to fantasize about it in some ways or the other? Let's recheck and reevaluate our own expectations. And let's do that to make our lives a little more enriching and a little more progressive, both on a very personal and within our interpersonal relationships as well. Let's try and do that for ourselves, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share, and subscribe.